Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going deep into the world of freedom-based companies.
Ooh, interesting.
These are the businesses that are really like throwing out the old rule book
Wow.
and finding success by really empowering their employees.
Yeah.
Our guide for this journey is Freedom, Inc. by Brian M. Carney and Isaac Getz.
Great book.
So we're going to ditch the old command and control mindset and really discover what a truly liberated workplace could look like.
I love it. I'm excited.
Me too. So, they start out the book kind of comparing and contrasting what they call how companies versus why companies.
Okay.
And so how companies, as you might imagine, are very much the traditional model. It's very top-down, hierarchical, all about those rules and procedures.
Lots of rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They tell employees how to do their jobs.
Yeah.
Often to the point where they stifle creativity and innovation.
Yeah. Yeah, you see that a lot.
And they bring up this really thought-provoking quote from Konosuke Matsushita,
Okay.
who's the founder of Panasonic.
Wow.
And he says, business is now so complex and difficult, the survival of firms depends upon the day-to-day mobilization of every ounce of intelligence.
Every ounce. That's a lot.
Every ounce. It's such a powerful statement.
Yeah.
I think back on my own work experiences, and it makes me think about, were the companies I was at really using every ounce of my intelligence?
Totally.
Yeah.
Are they just telling people what to do, or
were they just like, do this thing?
yeah, here's your task list kind of thing?
Exactly, yeah. And how companies, it seems, they failed to see that gold mine of talent and ideas that are right in front of them.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then on the other hand, you have why companies.
Okay, yeah.
Which they kind of flip the script. They focus on the purpose, the mission.
Got it.
The big picture.
Yeah.
And they trust their employees to figure out the how, as long as everyone's kind of aligned on the why.
That makes sense.
And one of the examples they give that really kind of grabbed my attention is W.L. Gore and Associates.
Oh, interesting.
The company behind Gore-Tex.
Okay.
And they have this anecdote about a supervisor named Lewis who was trying to write a rule book for the entire company.
Rule book.
A rule book. And I'm like, at a company that's known for innovation and agility, this doesn't seem to track.
Right.
But it gets better.
Yeah.
Bill Gore, the founder, completely shuts down the whole idea.
Really?
Yes. He passionately believes in empowering his employees, not controlling them.
I like that.
I do too. And instead of a rule book, he builds his company on 4 core principles.
Oh, okay.
Which are freedom, fairness, commitment, and something called the waterline.
Interesting. Yeah.
So these replace that traditional hierarchy and really kind of create this framework for making decisions and taking action.
Right.
And it's not anarchy, but it's about these guiding principles that give people a sense of direction and responsibility.
I see.
And they use this really interesting analogy of a yellow brick road. Instead of a rigid chain of command dictating every step. Leaders at Gore act more like mentors or sponsors. They're there to guide and support employees.
Right.
But they encourage them to find their own path to the solution.
That's like, here's the general direction, now go explore.
Exactly.
And figure out how to get there.
Exactly. So this is, a pretty radical approach, especially for a company that's had so much success and is so big. Can this work in other industries?
Yeah, that's the question.
Buckle up, Buttercup, because now we're going to a French brass foundry called FAVI.
Okay, this is like
far from Silicon Valley.
As far as you can get from Silicon Valley. And this is where we meet Jean-Francois Zobrist,
who is the CEO who takes this whole freedom thing to an entirely new level.
Okay.
So he walks into this company that is steeped in bureaucracy.
Oh, boy.
And says, we're getting rid of all the rules.
Whoa, no rules.
No rules. I'm like, a factory? No rules?
Yeah, how does it even work?
I know. How does anything get done?
Right.
But they paint this picture of Zobrist encountering an employee who's waiting to exchange a pair of work gloves. And, to get new gloves, it's this ridiculously complicated,
a bureaucratic
mess.
Oh, I hate that.
Filling out forms in triplicate.
Yeah.
Just to get, basic supplies.
The worst.
Oh, the worst.
It's soul crushing.
It really is. And so Zobrist is so fed up with this.
I bet.
that he decides to replace the entire chain of command with a single question.
Oh, really? What's the question?
Why are you doing what you're doing?
Oh, that's good.
Right. So simple.
Yeah.
But it cuts through all the BS. And, I mean, ultimately the answer boils down to customer satisfaction.
Yeah, that's the why.
That's the why.
Makes sense.
Right. And so, you know, did this crazy idea actually work?
I'm on the edge of my seat. Tell me.
Oh, it did more than work.
Oh, good.
FAVI thrived. They slashed their prices, never missed a single delivery, even weathered economic storms better than their competitors.
Oh, they're doing well.
Doing really well. You know, it really is this powerful example of what can happen when you unleash that intelligence and the initiative of your entire workforce.
For sure.
Now, it makes you really rethink everything you thought you knew about how businesses should be run, right?
Totally.
And this is where things get really interesting because Carney and Getz start to shine a light on the hidden costs of control.
Okay.
Even in companies that seem to be successful on the surface.
Interesting.
And they bring up this jaw-dropping story about the Royal Mail, the UK Postal Service. They were struggling with employee absenteeism.
Oh.
So rather than trying to figure out why employees weren't showing up to work, they're like, we have a solution.
Oh, what is it?
Offer prizes. Like cars and holiday vouchers.
They were trying to bribe people to come to work.
I know.
That's a very expensive Band-Aid.
I know. I'm like, this seems like a very expensive Band-Aid.
That's crazy.
And it highlights this bigger problem, right? Yeah. That you see at these traditional companies.
Right.
They treat the symptom instead of the disease.
Totally.
They focus on metrics and outcomes without addressing the underlying issues of morale and engagement.
Totally. Have you ever worked somewhere like that?
Oh, yeah.
Where they were just focusing on like the surface level stuff?
Absolutely. Where they're just focused on like, did you get this done? Did you check this box?
Yeah.
Okay, great. You get a gold star.
But they're not asking like, why are we doing this? You know, is this even a good thing to be doing?
Exactly. And it makes you feel like you're just a cog in the machine.
Right. Totally.
Not a valued member of the team.
Exactly.
And that brings us to this concept that they call managing for the 3%.
Managing for the 3%. All right.
So have you ever heard this?
No, explain it to me.
Okay, so think about it this way.
Okay.
You have this small percentage of employees who maybe break the rules or they're not pulling their weight.
Yeah.
Okay, so instead of addressing the root causes of their behavior, management's like, okay, we've got to create all these rules to catch these few bad apples.
Right. So then everyone suffers.
But what happens to the other 97%?
Yeah, exactly.
The ones that are doing the right thing, they get punished.
Yeah, they also
along with the rule breakers, right?
Really?
And so they're subjected to all these pointless rules, micromanagement, a general lack of trust.
It's like saying, we assume you're going to misbehave.
Yes.
So we're going to treat you like a child.
And it's so demoralizing.
It is, totally.
Right.
Yeah, and then people get less engaged, less motivated, and then, less likely to do good work.
Exactly. And that brings us to this powerful link between freedom and innovation.
Okay.
Because Carney and Getz argue that how companies are essentially squashing the creativity and initiative of the vast majority of their workforce.
Makes sense.
And they give an example of Jay Headley, who is a consultant at Accenture.
Right.
And he has this brilliant idea for a new technology.
Right.
But he keeps hitting roadblocks because the system is designed to keep people in their lane.
Right.
You know, not
don't think outside
the box, thinking. They even use the phrase chop wood.
Yeah, chop wood, stay in your lane, do what you're told.
Stay in your lane, exactly. And this is a stark contrast.
Yeah. To the approach at Gore, where they encourage everyone to experiment and take risks.
I like that.
They understand that innovation can come from anywhere.
Absolutely.
Not just the top of the hierarchy.
Right.
And so the question then becomes, what makes some leaders take the leap towards freedom? What makes them break away from that ingrained how mentality?
Yeah, good question.
And that's what we're going to be talking about after the break.
Ooh, exciting. I can't wait.
Me too. It's a good one. So we're back, and we're talking about what inspires some leaders to embrace this freedom-based approach. And Carney and Getz, they highlight two key triggers.
Okay.
Exasperation and admiration.
All right. exasperation and admiration.
Right, exasperation, so like they're just fed up.
Fed up.
With how things are going.
Exactly, like they hit a wall.
Yeah, you could see that. They're done with the limitations of the traditional how company.
Right, right.
And they give a great example of this with Jeff Westphal, the CEO of Vertex.
And he has this aha moment, right? He's trying to convince his wife to go on a spontaneous camping trip.
Okay.
And he realizes he's so focused on his agenda and his way of doing things that he's not listening to his wife at all.
Listening.
And it hits him like he's doing the exact same thing at work.
Oh, wow. So he was being kind of a dictator.
Exactly. Like he's so used to being the boss calling the shots that he's not really hearing what his team has to say.
Right.
And so, you know, he was running Vertex like a dictatorship, and it was creating all these conflicts and these power struggles.
Yeah, if you're not listening to anyone.
Exactly. And so he realizes, like, okay, I need to stop dictating and start listening.
The best leaders are the best listeners.
They are. And that's the other trigger that they talk about. Admiration.
Okay, admiration for what?
So this is when leaders are inspired by the success and culture of other freedom-based companies, and they think, hey, I want some of that.
They see it working.
They see it working.
Yeah.
And they give the example of Bob Kofsky, who's the founder of Sun Hydraulics.
Okay.
And he was just blown away by the innovation that was coming out of DuPont's research labs in the 1920s. Good point. And guess what? Those labs were operating with a very similar freedom-based model.
Oh, wow. So he's like, if they can do it, I can do it.
Exactly. And so, you know, it's like this light bulb goes off for him. He's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
If they can achieve these incredible results with this approach, why can't we?
Totally.
Right.
I love that.
It's like you get a glimpse of a different reality, a better way of doing things.
Makes you rethink everything.
It does. But even with these triggers, it's still a difficult journey.
Yeah, I bet.
Carney and Getz, they don't sugarcoat the challenges that these leaders face, right? And one of the biggest hurdles is just overcoming that skepticism. Right. Not just from other leaders, but from employees, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because people are so used to the old way of doing things.
The old way, it's comfortable.
Right. It's safe. It's familiar.
Right. Even if it's not working.
Even if it's not working.
Or it's not fun.
And then there's the fear.
Okay.
What if we give people too much freedom?
Right.
Won't everything just fall apart?
Yeah. What if it's just chaos?
Chaos.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the book addresses this head on.
Yep.
You know, liberating a company isn't about just throwing out all the rules.
Right.
Not letting chaos reign.
Yeah.
It's about replacing that rigid control with shared purpose.
Right.
And accountability.
So everyone's on the same page.
Exactly.
Right.
And these liberating leaders, they're still providing that guidance and support.
Okay, so they're not completely hands-off.
Not hands-off, but they're also not micromanaging.
Right, that balance.
It's about finding that sweet spot between autonomy and alignment.
Yeah, I like that.
So how do these companies actually function day to day?
Yeah.
How do they make decisions, allocate resources, and deal with conflict?
Yeah, how does that work?
Without this traditional hierarchy?
Yeah, it's a good question.
And so they kind of dive deeper into the inner workings of W. Gore and Associates.
Okay, yeah.
And, you know, we talked about those 4 guiding principles: freedom, fairness, commitment, and the waterline.
Right.
And these aren't just like feel-good slogans, right?
Right.
They're actually operationalized in very specific ways.
I like that.
And so, for example, instead of job titles, people have commitments.
Commitments, okay.
And these commitments aren't assigned by a manager.
Oh, interesting.
It's about people figuring out where their skills, passions align with the company's needs, and then making commitments to contribute in specific ways. So it's about that self-selection and ownership.
So you're not just told what to do. You're like, I want to do this.
Exactly. And if you want to change your commitment, you just talk to your team and you figure out a smooth transition. It's not about your responsibility to a boss.
Right.
It's about your responsibility to the group.
Right. I like that.
And then there's the waterline principle.
Right. Waterline. We talked about that.
And, you know, this is kind of a safeguard to prevent those really reckless decisions.
Right. That could sink the ship.
That could sink the ship.
Yeah.
And so if a decision could have a major impact on those core elements, people know to consult.
Right. Check with other people.
With others who have more expertise or experience.
Right. To get their input.
It's this blend of individual freedom and collective responsibility.
Right.
You know, a world away from that hierarchical decision-making.
Yeah, totally.
That can paralyze.
Yeah, slow things down.
Traditional companies.
For sure.
And then they get into a really interesting discussion about
what is it?
The impact of stress and disengagement on employees' well-being.
Right. Yeah, that's important.
And they talk about, you know, research showing that chronic stress can lead to all sorts of health problems like heart disease, diabetes.
Yeah, wow.
Even depression.
It can really affect you.
It really can. And so it's not just about feeling bad.
Right.
It's about serious.
Right, your actual health.
Physical and mental consequences.
Wow.
And then they bring in Robert Sapolsky, who is a primatologist.
A what?
So he studies primates.
Oh, okay. Monkeys.
Monkeys, apes, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And he studied baboons in Kenya.
Baboons. Interesting.
I know. Kind of a random...
Yeah, why baboons? But I guess it makes sense.
It does, because what Sapolsky found was that the baboons who were lower down in the social hierarchy...
So, like, the least powerful...
The least powerful, exactly. The ones who are constantly stressed and bullied had higher levels of stress hormones and poorer health outcomes.
Oh, wow.
And guess what?
What?
He found similar patterns in human workplaces.
Oh, wow. So, like, your boss is stressing you out?
Stressing you out.
You're going to get sick.
You're going to get sick. So it's a reminder that creating this freedom-based environment isn't just about boosting productivity and innovation.
It's about people's health.
It's about people.
Yeah.
It's about creating a healthier and more humane work environment.
I like that a lot.
And so, you know, they really drive home the point that people are whole human beings.
Right. Not robots.
Not robots. And so we've got to treat them that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, we're not done yet, because in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore how these freedom-based companies maintain their unique cultures, handle conflict, and even scale their unconventional approaches.
Wow. That's a lot to cover.
It is. It's a lot to cover. But it's all good stuff, so stick with us.
Okay. Can't wait.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Freedom, Inc. We've been exploring all these companies that are breaking free from those traditional hierarchies and empowering their employees to do amazing things.
Right. Really shaking things up.
Yeah. And I'm curious, you know, how do these freedom-based companies actually maintain their unique cultures?
Right. Especially as they grow.
Right, especially as they grow.
How do you keep that going?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what they talk about, this idea of the culture keeper.
Okay, culture keeper. That sounds important.
Yeah, and it's not really tied to a specific job title or anything.
Okay.
It's more of a mindset or responsibility that everyone kind of shares.
I see, so everyone's kind of looking out for it.
Yeah, they're protecting those values and principles that make this whole freedom-based approach work.
Okay.
And they have to be really vigilant, right?
Yeah, I bet.
Because it's easy to slip back into those old habits.
Right, back to command and control.
Exactly. Yeah, and they share a great story about this leader at Gore.
Okay.
Who noticed that their on-time delivery performance was slipping a little bit.
Oh, interesting.
And it turns out it was these newer employees who had come from more traditional companies.
Okay, so they were used to the old way.
Yeah, exactly. And they had this idea that like 80% on-time delivery was good enough.
Oh, no, that's not the Gore way.
Right. But at Gore, on-time delivery wasn't just a metric.
Right.
It was a reflection of their deep commitment to fairness and customer service.
Like it's part of their DNA.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of just like yelling at people or sending out a memo, this leader sat down and explained why it mattered so much.
Okay, so it was more about education and persuasion.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is who we are, and this is why it matters.
I like that.
It's a great example of leadership.
It is. Now, what about conflict?
Oh, yeah, good question.
How do you handle conflict in an environment where everyone's encouraged to speak their mind?
Yeah, that seems tricky.
It does.
Because, you know, if everyone's got an opinion, things could get heated.
And they acknowledge that, right?
They do. They say conflict's inevitable, but they think that these freedom-based companies are actually better equipped to deal with it.
Oh, interesting. Why?
Because when people feel safe to speak up, you're more likely to find the best solutions.
Yeah, and to actually hear different perspectives.
Exactly. They even tell the story about Bill Gore himself.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he loved a good debate. He actually encouraged people to disagree with him.
Wow, that's confidence.
I know, right? He wanted to hear all sides of an issue.
That's cool.
So yeah, it's not about avoiding conflict. It's about using it constructively.
And that requires psychological safety.
Right, totally.
Yeah.
People need to know that it's okay to speak their minds, even if they disagree with the boss.
Right, because if you don't have that, then people are just going to stay silent.
Yeah, and then you miss out on all those great ideas.
And you create a culture of fear.
Exactly. And that brings us to the role of leadership in these companies.
Okay, yeah, because it's clearly different from that traditional top-down model.
Right. They use words like guide or mentor.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
Instead of boss.
Servant leader is a term that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's about serving the needs of your team, removing obstacles, creating an environment where people can thrive.
Okay, but can this really work in larger organizations?
Right, that's the question everyone's asking.
Can you actually scale a freedom-based culture?
Yeah, does it just break down once you get past a certain size?
Oh, right.
And they say it is possible.
Okay.
And they give a bunch of examples of companies that have done it.
Okay.
Like, one that really stands out is USAA.
USAA.
Which is this huge insurance and financial services company.
Oh, wow. That's a big one.
Yeah, they've got like over 20,000 employees.
So it can work at scale.
Yeah, and they talk about Robert McDermott, the CEO in the early 1990s, who just decided to completely transform the company.
Really? What did he do?
He basically blew up the bureaucracy and moved towards this freedom-based model.
Wow, that's a bold move.
It was. He decentralized decision-making, created self-managing teams, and constantly reminded everyone about USAA's mission.
Okay, so it was about giving people more autonomy and making sure everyone was aligned on the why.
Exactly. And it worked.
Really?
Yeah, they saw huge improvements in customer satisfaction, employee engagement, and even their financial performance.
So it's not just good for people, it's good for business.
Right. But they do say that he faced a lot of resistance along the way.
Yeah, I bet, because change is hard.
It is. Especially in a big organization.
So how do you keep that momentum going?
Yeah, how do you prevent things from slipping back to the old ways?
Right.
And they talk about the importance of leadership.
Right.
Leaders need to be really vigilant about spotting any deviations from those core principles.
And I think they use a kind of a funny analogy here, right?
Yeah, they say one drop of urine in the soup is too much, and you can't get it out.
Okay, that's a little gross.
I know, right? But it makes the point.
Yeah, it does. It's like you can't compromise on those core values.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm thinking about all the companies out there that are operating in these highly regulated industries like banking or healthcare.
Right. Yeah, that seems tricky.
How can you have freedom within a system that's basically designed to limit it?
Yeah, lots of rules.
Tons of rules. And, you know, Carney and Getz, they argue that it is possible.
Okay.
But it requires a different kind of creativity.
Right. You got to work within the system.
Work the system.
Okay.
And they give the example of Handelsbanken.
Handelsbanken.
Which is a Swedish bank that has been super successful with a very decentralized, freedom-based approach.
And are they like a tiny bank or something?
No, they're one of the biggest and most profitable banks in Scandinavia.
Wow, that's impressive.
They've consistently outperformed their peers.
So they're doing something right.
They're doing something right. And a big part of it is that they empower those local branch managers.
Okay, so they're giving them a lot of autonomy.
Yeah, to make decisions, prioritize customer focus, and take a long-term perspective.
Yeah, not just chasing those quarterly profits.
Exactly. So it's a great example of how freedom can thrive even in those, like, super regulated environments.
I love that example.
And speaking of changing environments, what about remote work?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one these days.
Can you create a freedom-based culture when everyone's working from home?
Yeah, how do you build that trust and connection when you're not even in the same room?
Exactly. And, you know, they believe that remote work can actually enhance certain aspects of a freedom-based culture.
Really? How so?
Well, because people are already managing their own schedules, their own workspaces.
Right. That autonomy is already there.
So the key is to harness that.
Okay.
And make sure it's aligned with the company's purpose.
Makes sense.
And they highlight the importance of things like clear communication, you know?
Yeah, you got to be really good at communicating.
You do strong digital tools.
Yeah, the right tools are essential.
To facilitate collaboration.
Yeah.
And then, you know, really making a conscious effort to build that culture and connection virtually.
Right, so it's got to be intentional.
Intentional. And they mention Automatic.
Automatic, okay.
The company behind WordPress.
Oh, yeah, I know them.
As a great example.
Okay.
Because they've been fully remote.
Wow.
From day one.
That's amazing.
And they've built this thriving, freedom-based culture.
So It's possible.
It is possible.
Wow, that's really inspiring.
It is, and, it just shows that freedom isn't bound by location. It's really about that mindset and that culture.
Yeah, I love that.
Before we wrap up, I do want to touch on something that's really important.
Okay.
Diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Freedom should mean freedom for everyone.
Right, no exceptions.
Regardless of their background or identity.
For sure.
And Carney and Getz, they believe that these companies are actually better positioned to foster diversity and inclusion.
Why is that?
Well, because they're less likely to be bound by those traditional hierarchies and biases.
Okay, so the playing field is more level.
More level.
Okay.
And so, when you create an environment where everyone feels valued and respected, you're more likely to attract and retain a diverse workforce.
Makes sense.
And they give the example of Menlo Innovation.
Menlo Innovation.
Which is a software design company in Michigan.
Okay.
That has just built this incredibly diverse and inclusive culture.
That's awesome.
They focus on collaboration, open communication, shared ownership.
Yeah, everyone has a voice.
Everyone has a voice. And it's just inspiring to see how freedom can be this catalyst for creating a more just and equitable workplace.
It's really powerful.
It really is.
Yeah.
But, they point out, even these companies aren't perfect.
Yeah, no one's perfect.
Right. It's an ongoing process.
Right. Always got to be working at it.
Always got to be working at it.
Right.
So, for leaders out there who want to create this truly inclusive workplace, they emphasize things like intentional recruitment, bias awareness training, and building that culture of belonging.
Right. So everyone feels welcomed and respected.
Exactly.
Good stuff.
It is good stuff. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the nitty-gritty of how these companies operate to the profound impact they can have on individuals and society.
Absolutely.
What are your final thoughts?
I think this book is a real call to action.
Yeah.
It makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about work and leadership.
It really does.
And it reminds us that we all have the power to create a better world of work.
A more humane and fulfilling world of work.
Exactly. And they leave us with this question. The world is full of people who are waiting to be liberated. Who will set them free?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's a challenge to all of us.
It is.
Whether we're leaders, employees, or just citizens, to embrace these principles of freedom and create workplaces that are worthy of our best selves.
Well said.
Thanks.
We hope this deep dive has given you a fresh perspective on the power of freedom in the workplace.
It's been really eye-opening.
And maybe even spark some ideas about how you can create a more liberating environment for yourself and the people around you.
Right. So get out there and liberate somebody.
I love it. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, this is fun.
On this deep dive into Freedom, Inc.
Until next time.
Until next time.